you hear me all right? Hi, welcome, and happy Sunshine Week. My name is Netta, and I just wanted to quickly welcome you to the Open Gov Hub as the director here. I always like to start off by just asking if this is anyone's first time coming to the Open Gov Hub. Great, awesome. So we're really delighted to have you here this morning, and just to give you a very quick background, the Open Gov Hub was established in 2012 as the first co-working community and network focused around this theme of open government. And so we have a community now of over 40 organizations, mostly NGOs, who are focused on promoting transparency, accountability, and civic participation all around the world. And so our mission as the Hub is to support this global community of open government advocates. And we do that by facilitating many different groups to share resources together to really, get their work done more efficiently, and also to collaborate in a huge variety of ways. So we, in order to activate kind of collaboration and connections, we really love to partner with a variety of organizations and host a number of events, both for our members and also open to the public. And really delighted to be partnering with GAP and Public Citizen this morning for a really timely, I think, training around whistleblowing. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Shanna from Public Citizen to introduce the event. And thanks for being here.
Good morning. All right, great crowd here today. Thank you everybody who's here in person and who's watching through the live webcast. And we hope you can see us okay if you are. Again, my name is Shanna Devine, and I'm the Worker Health and Safety Advocate for Public Citizen. We're a consumer rights organization based here in DC. And it's a real privilege to be providing this introduction for a very timely Sunshine Week training on how our groups, public interest organizations, can work most effectively with whistleblowers. And fortunately, we're in good hands today. GAP, the Government Accountability Project, the nation's leading whistleblower protection and advocacy organization, will be leading today's training. I'd also like to thank our co-sponsors, Open Gov Hub, who you just heard from, who very generously offered their space for today, as well as Project on Government Oversight, Open the Government, and Public Citizen. Just moving forward, as we look at commemorating Sunshine Week, we really need to think about the role that whistleblowers play. There are eyes and ears to government abuses. We're here today to learn about how we can support them in channeling their information into power to contribute to the public's right to know, while also protecting them and our own organizations in the process. In a climate in which the truth is increasingly difficult to discern, amid obfuscation of the facts, as well as unparalleled censorship, government employees are uniquely positioned to shed light on what takes place behind the Trump administration's closed doors. Whether the issue is taxpayer waste, national security abuses, or as we're seeing on a daily basis, dismantling our public protections within the environment, labor, and consumer rights, we rely heavily on whistleblowers to shed light on this information. In the words of Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, sunlight is our best disinfectant. That's why this Sunshine Week, we're also highlighting how the Trump administration is eclipsing the sunshine of transparency with secrecy. Granted, the vital role of whistleblowers is by no means limited to this administration or government abuses. Whistleblowers are as timeless as institutional corruption itself. Take, for instance, Deep Throat, who exposed the Watergate scandal, or the late climate scientist Rick Piltz, who disclosed that the Bush administration was trying to censor climate change impacts, or NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden, who followed in the footsteps of prior NSA whistleblowers, let us know that Big Brother is watching. Whatever the issue may be, we have always relied on these brave civil servants to warn us about abuses of power that betray the public trust. Granted, this administration's unprecedented attack on the truth itself, as well as its attack on democracy, are unique. Excuse me. From reports of low morale throughout the government to a wave of social media activity by unanimous employees who are sharing daily the administration's latest affront to their agency missions, we now have a new generation of truth tellers. And there is a palpable undercurrent of dissent. However, that undercurrent of dissent is also met with an equally strong opposition to dissent from this administration itself. And this has created a chilling effect throughout the federal workplace. When a whistleblower's disclosures fall on deaf ears within their own workplaces, their desire to have an impact is often what causes them to come to our organizations with sensitive information. And it's our responsibility as advocates to rely heavily on that information to protect our sources while benefiting from their knowledge in the process. And also to know our own limitations, which is largely what this training is about. Fortunately, we have a new guide everybody should have on your chair or access to online if you're watching through the live stream. Working with Whistleblowers, a guide for public interest organizations. This is a guide of 40 years of best practices from the Government Accountability Project, helping us to demystify the process of working with whistleblowers and also share some really important lessons learned. This is a must read for all public interest groups. However, as Gab will explain further, it's by no means a replacement for speaking with an experienced employment attorney while you're contacted by a whistleblower. It also won't be an opportunity today for us to cover everything in the guide because there's just not enough time. Some sections, such as using information security to safely communicate, require their own workshops. So moving forward, there will be an opportunity for Q&A afterwards with both of our speakers who are whistleblower attorneys. And it's a great privilege that I now move forward with introducing them. So I'll start with Dana Gold, as GAP's Education Director, orchestrates a broad range of public education initiatives and serves as an ambassador for the organization. Having begun her career with GAP in 1991, she's intimately familiar with the whistleblower landscape. Dana uses that expertise to engage our partners, many of whom are present today or watching, across a wide range of stakeholder groups and collaborative efforts to advance the public interest. Tom Devine serves as GAP's legal director and co-founder. During his almost 4 decades with GAP, he has represented or informally helped over 7,000 whistleblowers. He has also been a leader in campaigns to pass or defend nearly 40 domestic or international whistleblower laws. And he is the author of numerous books, including one which we'll learn more about, the Corporate Whistleblower Survival Guide. It has a lot of really common sense tips that will be integrated into today's training. Without further ado, let me hand it off and give a warm welcome to Dana Gold.
Hi, thanks for coming. I'm Dana, and yes, I work at GAP. I'm an attorney. And Shanna, thank you so much for that excellent framing of why we're here today. So I won't go into that, but I'm just really thrilled. The guide has been a long work in progress with a lot of public interest partners who really identified in a retreat we had over the summer that being able to think about how to work with whistleblowers is an effective tool to promote transparency and accountability with something, not just something GAP should do or some other organizations, but it's really central to advancing all of our work, all of the work of public interest organizations. And so I'm so proud to finally be able to share this resource with everybody, and this training is a piece of that. So, so we have a lot to cover, but can't cover everything. There will be lunch served afterwards, so we'll have plenty of time for more Q&A at that time and discussion after, since we're just gonna blitz through and get as much into you as we can. So so thanks. And thanks to all of our co-sponsors again. Amazing. Okay, so let's, so this is GAP. We are a whistleblower advocacy organization, but we promote government and corporate accountability, even though our name is not, our name is very timely now, but we do more than that. And we do that by advancing occupational free speech, defending whistleblowers, and empowering citizen activists. I always think actually that what we do is that we both address the two issues that employees usually stay silent which is fear of futility, that nothing will happen if they speak out in the face of wrongdoing, and fear of reprisal. And those two are unfortunately really legitimate concerns, but I like to think that, GAP's methodology of both providing legal representation in the case of making sure that the employee is protected, but also making sure that the underlying disclosures are addressed, because that is what is motivating an employee to speak out. So being able to address those two drivers that are kind of catalyzing an employee to risk, professional and personal harm. Sometimes they're actually not quite aware of that risk when they do speak out, but that really makes GAP not just a law firm, right? It's that we care about the underlying issues, and we also care very much about the employee's right to surface those issues. So that's GAP. So I want to talk about, just frame some concepts, because I do think that the word whistleblower is edgy, right? Not in the environmental data government form, but in the edgy term of edgy. Tom Devine actually has this nice cultural definition, which I think does capture what we think of as whistleblowing: someone who exercises free speech rights to challenge abuses of power that betray the public trust. It really is that exercising of a right to identify a serious wrong. Legally, though, it's important to understand kind of the legal framework. So here's a definition under the Whistleblower Protection Act, which is the primary law that protects federal non-intelligence community employees. So under the Whistleblower Protection Act, a whistleblower is an employee who discloses concerns they reasonably believe evidence a violation of law, rule, or regulation, gross mismanagement, a gross waste of funds, an abuse of authority, or a substantial and specific danger to public health and safety. Also under the Whistleblower Protection Act, next slide. They now, under the Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act, included that you can report censorship related to scientific research that would result in any of those forms of misconduct that I had just listed. Also, refusing to obey an order that would require the individual to violate a law is, again, under the Whistleblower Protection Act, considered protected activity. So I'll talk in a second about the legal landscape, but what I wanted to point out about the legal definition, can you go back? Actually, no, that's fine, because it actually has the pieces, is that to constitute protected whistleblower activity, we're talking about something serious, because it's the act of, we want to protect whistleblowers because they are disclosing information that is how we promote compliance and how we protect the public interest. So the disclosure has to rise to a level of serious wrongdoing. It's not, a waste of funds of $10 abuse of buying expensive bottled water, and we shouldn't do that. That's really not going to rise to a level. It's not wrong, and it can be corrosive to workplace culture when there's low-level forms of corruption and wrongdoing. But really, to rise to this level, we're talking about pretty serious disclosures. So, and I think the fact that so we're usually talking about employees, not always, but 95% of the time, the whistleblower legal protection schemes are employee protection schemes. And again, it's about this. The nature of what the disclosure is. So that's, I think, important to know. As I said, the legal landscape is a patchwork of protections. We can go to the next. So there's no one law. There's no Title VII for whistleblowers. There's no one law. And this is actually where besides just the vulnerability of possibly facing really serious reprisal, which Tom will talk about the different forms that can take. But the landscape is very difficult to navigate because there is this patchwork. So it depends on, I mentioned the Whistleblower Protection Act. That protects federal employees largely, but there are a bunch of exceptions. Intelligence contractors aren't covered, postal workers aren't covered, GAO employees aren't covered. So there are all of these different exceptions. So it depends on, but so there are these other laws, like the environmental laws, for instance, have employee protection provisions in them. So if you blow the whistle on something that would violate that law or the purpose of that law, then contractors usually, or corporate employees have protections. Some federal employees have protections. So so this isn't like, call us, we're lawyers. It's complicated. So that is why lawyers matter in this kind of situation, because it depends on analyzing what kind of wrongdoing was disclosed, is it a federal employee? Is it a corporate employee? Is it a federal contractor employee? Where do they live? Are they a state or city municipal employee? Who and to, how and to whom the information was disclosed? Did they go through internal channels first? Did they go outside first? It depends on the law about what they dictate. So it's like this, it's this insane, like for those of you who went to law school, it's like the games a problem where it's like, you know, if John, Bob, Larry, Sue, and Dave are sitting around a table and one has meat and the other one has vegetables, what color is the tablecloth? That's kind of like whistleblower protection. So it's this analysis of what kind of retaliation and when did they become aware, because what's the statute of limitations and where was the disclosure made and what kind of information was disclosed. It's and then they all have different remedies and processes. So it really is complicated, and that creates a degree of vulnerability. I always like to think, though, that the patchwork of protection certainly, it actually also evidences, though, as much of a problem as it is, and Tom's going to talk about how we're actually trying to change the patchwork to consolidate some of these laws, but as a next legislative move. But it really shows how most of the whistleblower protection laws that have been passed unanimously with bipartisan support. And that's like the secret of Washington. So the patchwork actually reflects this widespread understanding that whistleblowers are the best mechanism to promote compliance and to protect the public interest. And so the patchwork reflects that, but it also creates this potential landmine for that you could fall through the cracks. Okay, so let's go quickly through contributions. So we actually, Shanna already mentioned actually Edward Snowden, and Rick Piltz here is a picture of him on the left. He was the climate science whistleblower who disclosed editing. But these are whistleblowers have done amazing things, and they range in terms of, you know, the kinds of disclosures. So up here, David Graham blew the whistle on the fact that he's an FDA scientist who blew the whistle on Vioxx was killing thousands of people. Kathy Harris in the middle, she worked at the U.S. Customs Office way back in the day, and she blew the whistle on the fact that they were racially profiling African-American women as drug smugglers and sometimes detaining them for days and doing body cavity searches. It was unbelievable. Total reform happened to stop those practices. Walt Hamasitis, on the far left, I guess, or right for you, is a Hanford nuclear whistleblower, contractor for the Department of Energy, who blew the whistle on technical safety problems at the biggest waste treatment plant that could have resulted in the Fukushima-like disaster. Ken Kendrick in the middle, he worked for the Peanut Corporation of America and disclosed filthy sanitation practices that basically resulted in the largest food recall in history. Just 9 people died from a salmonella outbreak, hundreds were sickened. So, you know, a huge range of kinds of disclosures. Again, that for, I don't know who's in the room, so I'd love to find that out, but different public interest issues are, you know, we're kind of broken into different issues of concern. Pick a whistleblower, you can advance your mission down the field incredibly fast because you have an insider who has the goods that can really just be a game changer, not just someone who's a witness or a victim, but someone who has information about bad practices. So I'm talking quickly, and I know I did that, but you can follow. So finally, all right, no, there are 2 more things I want to cover, and I will. So go ahead. Actually, no, Joe, just say yeah, this is you. I don't have any more slides. So, okay. So I just want to do a little bit of myth busting. So Ed Snowden, we think about him a lot. He kind of sucks all the air out of the room around whistleblowing. We often think Snowden equals whistleblowing. And I think that's created a narrative that whistleblowing is a crime because disclosing classified information is a crime. National security whistleblowers have very limited protections, and they often have to report a crime to disclose far worse crimes. As I said, it's a legally protected right for most employees to blow the whistle. And so this is a problematic narrative. When we think of most whistleblowers are not national security whistleblowers, they're not in the intelligence community, they have legal rights to report wrongdoing free from reprisal. So that is a really important myth to understand, as it sucks the air of the room around the narrative of icy whistleblowers. I think the other thing we think about their motives and, you know, like, are they doing it for self-enrichment or, you know, protection? There are those apples, but for the most part, most people do not get rich blowing the whistle. That is not how the scheme works. They're only with the fraud claims laws, or is there a mechanism for getting a bounty. Most do not have, this is not a path, is not, you might as well play the lottery. that's a better path for enrichment. They care about, they see something wrong and they want something done about it, and they can't, and often they just are doing their jobs. They don't see themselves as whistleblowers. They just are doing their jobs. And then finally, I think the other piece of information that's super important is that most whistleblowers report internally first. They usually twice before they go outside. I think there's a sense that, whistleblowers are people who go to the press. They don't first, but it's an important piece of information to know if a whistleblower comes to you. The fact that they've probably raised that concern internally first means that that information is tied to that person. So even if it's not, directly, their fingerprints are on it. And it could be because they raised the concern internally first, or because of the nature of their job responsibility or their expertise. So for instance, I just want to talk about second, 1 minute is perfect, about anonymity, is that I think that sometimes there's a sense that, NGOs are like, call us, we can, promise anonymity and just use your information. That's a really dangerous promise to make. It's probably something that can't be kept, and over-promising and then potentially making someone vulnerable is it's damaging to your reputation as an organization, and it could be damaging certainly to that employee, and even for other employees who might think about going forward for support. So there's a lot of discussion about anonymity in the guide, and I encourage you to look at that. But so because of the nature of an employee source, it's just really important to be aware that that information, again, is tied to that employee. But anonymity is also not always the best strategy. It's, legally, you need to prove if you suffer reprisal, the employer was aware that you raised the disclosure. So even if they can figure it out, it might be a harder case to prove if you tried to do it behind closed doors, or try to keep your identity confidential. It's also an opportunity to be insulated from reprisal, because you're kind of putting the employer on notice. Hey, I raised this big concern. So if you do anything, we're gonna be able to make that case. So it puts them on notice, and it also creates this opportunity to build a campaign or solidarity with credibility of support from public interest organizations or Congress or other advocacy groups to focus on the content of the disclosure and not the messenger, so the focus on the message, not the messenger. But this is a decision that should be made in careful consultation with a lawyer, ideally a cause lawyer who cares both about the risk of reprisal, but also how to be effective with a disclosure, and not made for that employee. So they need to know their rights. So I'm going to hand it over to Tom, and he's going to give you some details around best practices and how the role of public interest organizations.
Thanks, Dana. When you're working with whistleblowers, I think it's very important to know the precarious position these folks are in. At GAP, we nickname whistleblowing the sound of professional suicide. And let me give you some examples why we think that. Commonly, the thousands that we've worked with, we've seen these tactics over and over again. The first tactic is shift the spotlight, what we call the smoke screen syndrome. Shift the spotlight from the message to the messenger by opening up a retaliatory investigation and then smearing them with a witch hunt, so that everybody will be talking about the whistleblower instead of the abuse of power. The second is to isolate them so that they'll be cut off from the flow of information and they'll be made an example with other colleagues. Third is to publicly humiliate them at the workplace before you fire them. Make them the coin of attacks and objects and point out all their mistakes in a repressive manner. Fourth is threaten them and make sure that all the other employees are aware of that threat. A fifth example is to set them up for failure. Give them responsibilities to solve the problem that they're complaining about internally, but make it impossible. We call it putting them on a pedestal of cards. Mobbing them. This means recruiting other employees to file allegations against them, to funnel into the retaliatory investigation with the idea that if they help stick the whistleblower, they'll get a carrot. Build a record against them so that you can justify, have the foundation to terminate them later. Paralyze their career. Don't give them training. Don't give them work. Don't give them assignments. Don't give them promotions. Make sure that they're just collecting a salary and nothing else at best. Eliminate their jobs, common tactic in labor disputes. Blacklist them. after they get fired. Make sure they'll never work again, at least in their profession or their industry. And it gets worse. Physically attack them. We've all seen the examples of people who are attacked or even murdered for blowing the whistle. And the most common tactic regularly, prosecute them. Sue them. But if they're a corporate whistleblower, sue them. Multi-million-dollar slap suits against them, which they can't defend. They can't afford to defend, even if they're right. Or get the government to prosecute them with a retaliatory criminal investigation, such as for stealing company records, which were necessary to prove fraud or corporate crimes. This is a life's crossroad decisions for these people. And it's not risk-free for you either. NGOs are vulnerable. You can be a target of the same slap suits. You can be put under tax audit because you're embarrassing the government through the whistleblowers that you're doing. The government may be subpoenaing you for all the records that you have. That Jeff was threatened with being put in prison for not turning over all of our confidential sources to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Now, you can fight and win these battles, but this is a high-stakes, high-risk partnership. So why do it? Well, the reason to do it is because it shifts the balance of power. And every activist knows there's a certain amount that we're able to push the system to do, to back up and retreat on behalf of the public interest. So we can't get much farther than that. And that balance becomes fairly stable. But with the power of the truth, whistleblowers change that balance of power. They allow you to accomplish much more because you're not flying blind anymore. You've got the evidence and the informational ammunition, and they can change the course of history in doing it. Well, let me give you a few examples of how whistleblowers can be helpful for you. Basically, they're serving as the public's eyes and ears. That's why they're maximizing your ability to make a difference. And let me give you some examples of how they can do it. They bear witness through testimony. They allow you to have actual evidence, not just accusations, but evidence. They navigate where to find the evidence. And that can be invaluable for you in targeting your Freedom of Information Act request. You know the right documents to ask for. Subpoenaing, knowing the right things to demand in subpoenas if there is public interest litigation going on. Third example is they make backup copies of key evidence. So when a company says, or an agency says there's nothing there, they say, oh, I'm sorry, but you're lying, because we happen to have a copy of the evidence that you say doesn't exist. They serve as the human dictionaries, encyclopedias, to demystify all the professional jargon that bureaucracies use to camouflage what they're actually doing by turning one-syllable words into five-syllable words. Well, they know how to translate that for you. They provide leverage with law enforcement, regulatory agencies, politicians, the courts. It's not you folks anymore. You've got an invaluable witness that's essential for the mission of that particular government institution. They have a responsibility to deal with you. It's not just a good deed. They can form a community of whistleblowers. And what I've learned is, it's easy for a corrupt bureaucracy to say that one whistleblower is a nut or has hidden agendas or is really a bad person. You shouldn't take them seriously. But, when you have 40 whistleblowers, 50 whistleblowers, it's not too credible to say, everybody's lying except me, who happens to be benefiting unusually from some allegations that are being put on the table. Another way that whistleblowers can, and what I've seen is, if you're effective in protecting the pioneer whistleblower, you'll get the rest of them. There's always a lot of people who are kind of sitting on the fence. They don't like what's happening, but they want to see if anything can be done about it. They want to see if it's going to be professional suicide if they try. And if you deliver for the opening whistleblowers and you earn their trust, they'll be your matchmakers to expand that community. And we would go from the point of having one whistleblower to having a party of a dozen whistleblowers after work every day to tell me the latest developments that were happening at a nuclear power plant. And finally, they can monitor follow-up commitments. When a company says, or an agency says, oh, we'll do better, we won't do that again, we'll be good, you know that you can't really trust that just on blind faith. And whistleblowers make sure that you don't have to have blind faith. Well, so, that's quite a sales pitch. Maybe I can give you a few examples to support it. And I won't go into too much detail because Dana's giving you some examples, but I don't think there's a problem with piling it on for this because you really need to know how much of a difference these folks can make. Fraud in government contracts. They've increased the government's recovery from $10 million a year to over $3 billion last year through a whistleblower law called the False Claims Act, which allows you as an NGO to blow the whistle in court, challenging fraud in government contracts. And it's not just money. Government contracts certify that they're complying with health and safety rules for all of the federal spending that's done. It can funnel right into your organizational mission. Or another example with unsafe drugs with Dr. Graham, who Dana pointed out. 40,000 people had died from Vioxx. About nearly as many people as died in the Vietnam War from a drug that our government officially said was safe. Thanks to a whistleblower, that carnage ended. Or let's go to meat and poultry safety. 5 times whistleblowers have stopped the federal government in both political parties from deregulating meat and poultry so that government-approved food would be vouched for by corporate honor systems where they'd be inspecting themselves. 5 times they stopped. Or dairy safety. Thanks to an FDA whistleblower, we learned that 80% of commercial milk had illegal animal drugs contaminating it. And thanks to his dissent, we got a national milk testing program which cleaned that supply up. Nuclear power. At the Zimmer nuclear power plant, it was 97% complete when the first of 50 whistleblowers came to us. It ended up not being completed because we were able to prove that instead of using the most safe, expensive, safe, trustworthy, reliable nuclear grade steel in the world, they're building it with steel from automobile junkyards and hundreds of similar allegations like that. Or the 3 Mile Island cleanup, which was being done so illegally. We were on the verge of having a meltdown which would cause the evacuations of 3 different states. Thanks to whistleblowers, the cleanup had to be completely redone and there was no tragedy. Or toxic incinerators. Toxic incinerators, the companies that were running them were saying nothing illegal is being burned here, it's all safe. Thanks to whistleblowers from their own records, we learned that they were burning mercury, arsenic, lead, heavy metals, dioxin, the stuff that we use for Agent Orange. And this was being done right next to churches and schoolyards. Thanks to whistleblowers, those incinerators were moved out of the area or closed down. Now, I could keep going on, but I think we're making the point here. These can be the most effective partners that you can hope for. So how do you do it? How do you develop this partnership? Well, if they say in real estate, the magic words are location, location, location. For whistleblowers, it's trust, trust, trust. Relationships, relationships, relationships. It's relationships of earned trust. If you earn their trust, they will open up. Well, so how do you do it? How do you earn their trust? Well, let me give you a few generic examples. First, you do your homework. You make sure that you're sensitive to and you prove to them that you care about what happens to them. You learn what their rights are. You learn and let them know. I give warnings to people so they don't think that I'm just seducing them into exposing themselves to professional suicide. So that you let them know this is a partnership from the beginning and it's a two-way street partnership. And what is examples of how you can do that? Take and get, we've got some cards outside that are survival tips. Dana can hold them up for you. They're there for everybody. Just study those a little bit. Or study the NGO whistleblower guide that Dana put together. That gives you the highlights. Or give yourself a real course. Get a corporate whistleblower survival guide, a handbook to committing the truth. I've got the International Business Book of the Year award. The companies need to read. You need to read it too. You can get them for $2.50 off Amazon if you buy used copies, so they're cheap. Do your homework. Let them know that you care about what happens to them and that you're informed about it. And then a second overview that I would suggest is one that Dana previewed. Team up with a cause lawyer. Not a lawyer who's a commercial lawyer, because they'll say, don't talk to anybody that'll lower the value of your knowledge, and we won't be able to get more hush money. Get a lawyer who's committed to the same principles as you, but respects their duty to the whistleblower. And that way they know that you're not using them. You've structured it so that they're going to be working through a partner who's going to be covering their back. And GAP helps people to find those lawyers. They're invaluable partnerships, and they're valuable if you're put on the spot and sued. The way that we were able to stop having to turn over our confidential sources, the attorney-client privilege. We were able to protect the people that we were representing. What's some other examples of how to earn their trust? Well, explain to the whistleblower, make it not just information sharing. Tell them why this matters to you. Tell them about your commitment to the issue. Tell them about experiences that you might have had in your family with people who went through the same things that they're considering. Honor all your commitments, scheduling to substantive, particularly scheduling. People are nervous wrecks, and they have to know that they can take your word at face value. Be clear about confidentiality from the beginning, what you can commit to and what you can't, so that you don't have any broken promises later. And that means working with a cause lawyer or with the Government Accountability Project to know those boundaries. Be clear about the protection you can provide and what you can't. Let organizations know that you're considered an attack on your organization if there's any retaliation against the whistleblowers who are providing evidence to help you. Make their protection a visible priority. They have to know that they're not just information objects. This is a two-way street relationship. Provide a safe environment for your interviews and communications with them. Let them pick where you're going to talk so that they feel safe about it. Engage in active listening when you talk to them. There's nothing that, one, trust is very important, but another thing that's very important for opening up is feeling heard. If you have active listening, you're reading back to them what you've heard, and they know you're paying attention, and you're getting quality control right from the beginning to correct any mistakes. Engage in that quality control. Enfranchise them in the larger context. Don't just get their information, say thanks. Make them part of the team. Let them know. Go over new developments with them. Ask their opinions about them. Sustain the relationship after you've done this initially. Well, folks, that's some of the generic traits for developing relationships of trust. So let me finish now by talking about, once you've got that, what's the strategy for how to effectively turn their truth into power? The strategy is what we call legal campaigns. At GAP, we don't do legal cases. That's like David versus Goliath. We do guerrilla legal warfare, legal campaigns. And what does that mean? It means that at GAP or with you, we're not just representing a whistleblower. We're information matchmakers to hook up the isolated whistleblower with the majority of society who should be benefiting from their knowledge. And normally, here we got it. One slide further back. Normally, when they start out, whistleblowers are isolated. This dot, that's the whistleblower. This big circle, that's the organization where they work. And all the pressure is to keep the truth inside that circle because it can't be defended. They can't withstand scrutiny. So what's the second thing? We play information matchmaker and get the word out to everybody who should be benefiting from that whistleblower's knowledge. City and county government, the NGOs like yourself, competitors, corporate or agency bureaucratic rivals, community citizens groups, national citizens groups, the media, the lifeline to break secrecy, relevant law enforcement agencies, so many law enforcement agencies and government regulators that no one has the option to cover up because somebody else might not, and then they'll look horrible. And the board of directors with an institution, I briefed the board. Do you know the liability your management is causing for you people? Congress and the state legislatures to get public hearings. We get the word out to all these people, not just a judge in a courtroom. Let's go to the next slide. And what happens when we do that? Instead of the corrupt bureaucracy surrounding the whistleblower, it's society surrounding the corrupt bureaucracy. And when that happens, the balance of power shifts, information turns into power, and you've had an effective partnership with whistleblowers. Yeah, I'm a lawyer, so it's a very unusual situation for me that there's more time than all the things that I wanted to say. So I'm going to cede the rest of my time to you folks for questions and answers. But I want to close with the biggest lesson that I've learned at GAP. There's two lessons. One is the one that Shanna shared, Justice Brandeis, profound truth. That sunlight is the best disinfectant if corruption is a social disease. But the other truth that I've learned is that in a free society, there's nothing more powerful than the truth. It's more powerful than money, than conventional authority, than political power, if it's used strategically. And you folks have the power to use it that way.
Wow. Thank you so much, Tom and Dana. That was incredible. And I know there was a lot of information just shared. You're not expected to remember it all. That's why the guides are here. So please study them, use them, share them, promote them. It goes into detail on everything that was just shared. And with that, we are going to have an opportunity for Q&A. But first, we'd like to introduce one of our other sponsors for today, Jesse Francois with Open the Government, who has a new FOIA guide that he's going to share a bit of information about. And as I think was previewed, or at least Jesse will be able to touch on with FOIA, this is a really key tool that can be used for individuals such as ourselves when we don't want to put the whistleblower on the spot, but they can help direct us to valuable information that we can then FOIA. As long as it's not too specific that it's something maybe only they will know, they can help point us in the right direction without being caught in the process. So we should all be thinking about FOIA, and we're going to learn more about it through Jesse right now.
Thanks so much, Shannon. Thanks so much, Dana and Tom, and everyone for letting me come to this event. So, yeah, so Shannon mentioned, FOIA is a critical tool to getting information around what the whistleblower is exposing. So I think page 23 of this guide talks about how FOIA is an important mechanism that can help. And so this kind of comes out of that guide, an extension. They're kind of complementary. But using FOIA also, so this documents a number of case studies of successful FOIA work that happens in collaboration. So groups working together, working with researchers, investigators, lawyers who are defending whistleblowers, lawyers who are doing litigation, journalists, technologists, investigators that are working together in creative ways to get information through FOIA that often involves using also transparency laws at the local and state level, transparency laws in other countries, that often have information that you can get about U.S. foreign policy and other places to document human rights abuses by security forces that the U.S. is providing security assistance to. So all types of information that again comes back to what whistleblowers are doing at the core, exposing information about violations of public trust, waste, fraud, and abuse. So there's some great lessons learned. It provides kind of some recommendations, towards the end, some basics, but also some kind of more advanced ways to work together with journalists, to work together with different advocacy groups that have similar aims, but are using FOIA sometimes in siloed spaces to come together, file joint requests, work in coalitions, to really kind of maximize the power of the information law and get the information that you need for your investigations and for your advocacy work. So thanks so much. There's some copies that we'll pass around here and then also on the table on the way out. Really appreciate the invite here, and thanks everyone.
Okay, we're We're going to move into Q&A, and people may or may not see there's food outside. So after a few minutes of Q&A, since people are watching online, we'll just go ahead and jump into that. But then we're going to stop within about 10 to 15 minutes, get some food, and we can bring it back in to answer more questions. I'm going to hand it over to Dana to also just real quick share some additional information while we figure out who we're going to take the first question from.
Guys, thanks. I just want to share, and maybe this will dovetail or predict some of the questions that are happening, but we also, for Sunshine Week, well, in October, we released a guide for journalists on working with whistleblowers. We have a great project at spj.org. We partnered with the Society of Professional Journalists on a whole really deep resource around whistleblowing. So I encourage you to go to spj.org to check that out. But this week, we also, in addition to the guide for public interest organizations, finished our guide, Speaking Up for Science, a guide to whistleblowing for federal employees. So hopefully we'll be working with AGU and UCS and our friends at March for Science and other organizations to help get the word out there. But to the extent that we're also going to be making guides for other employees across the federal government in different sectors. But since the science employees are particularly embattled right now, that's what we focused on this first. So this is a resource because I think that, because I said most whistleblowers don't think of themselves as whistleblowers, they think of themselves as information. Often they will come to you as a public interest organization who focuses on an issue, of expertise. And so to the extent, as Tom said, for you to arm yourselves with knowledge about what the rights and risks of an employee are, being able to point them to a resource like this is really valuable for your own credibility and for their safety. So to the extent that this is something of interest to you, to get multiple copies so you can hand to sources who might come to you with concerns, let me know. We also have these smaller wallet cards that Tom had mentioned, which are just like more discreet, but they're like about knowing your rights and some survival tips. So those are other resources that we have available if those would be useful for you expanding your mission as you work with different sources come to you. So yeah, so Q&A. Any questions? And Tom and I will just stand up. I don't know, we can just stand here or whatever.
Yeah.
So,
I'll bring the mic around. Don't be shy.
we just fire hose
And
you and
please
you have
just
everything you
share
need.
your name and organization if you have an affiliation.
Hi, my name is John Morgan. I'm a senior researcher at CREW, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. I was just wondering if either one of you have received any tips or any whistleblowers have come forward from Capitol Hill, because I know there's a number of challenges with reporting wrongdoing on Capitol Hill, especially when it comes to sexual harassment and sexual misconduct. So I just wonder if you could describe the challenges of dealing with that.
I think there are probably few employees in the United States who have fewer rights than congressional staff on Capitol Hill. And since we're regularly working with them for national policy reform issues, they're very, very hesitant. Sometimes they'll gripe, but they're not in the position to realistically blow the whistle, unless it's a sexual harassment lawsuit where there have been EEO rights since the 1980s. Shanna, however, has recruited the Whistleblower Rights Coalition, the Make It Safe Coalition, behind an initiative to get whistleblower rights for congressional staff, the same as for federal employees. And the House Office of Compliance has recommended this 10 times. The politicians haven't been hearing it, and I'm not real optimistic that they're going to, even in this current crisis.
Well,
my name is Damian Mark. I'm from Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington as well. And I guess beyond, a push to try to get the same protections for persons on Capitol Hill as persons working in federal agencies, are there any other, whistleblower protection policies that you're seeking to get legally codified at the moment? And if yes, what effect do you think they'll have on the current the current plane that whistleblowers are operating on? And if no, are there ones that you've, started to brainstorm about that you think could have some effect?
Thank you so much.
You just handed him oh, talk about your favorite thing.
I think the context for your question is that we have had a legal revolution in whistleblower rights in the United States. The 40 years I've been at GAP, we've gone from 1978, basically the at-will doctrine, to now the entire country is pretty much blanketed with whistleblower rights. There are varying degrees of quality, and that kind of sets the stage for some of our initiatives. One initiative, almost the entire private sector now has corporate free speech rights, but it's through 50 different laws, starting in 40 years ago and gradually evolving. No two are alike, they're like snowflakes. Everyone's different. And you just don't know what your rights are. In some of the early ones, which were wonderful breakthroughs in principle, we've nicknamed the dinosaur statutes because they're so primitive and they're so weak. It's almost like you're spending a lot of money to hammer the final nail in your own professional coffin. Your chances of getting justice are so low. And some of the more modern ones are outstanding. They're global, setting the global pace. So one thing that we're pushing for is a Whistleblower Consolidation Act, so that we would extract the best practices from the modern laws that have been passed unanimously and apply them to everyone. We think there's a good chance of doing this if there's effective citizen advocacy. I knew that the tide had turned with whistleblowers from viewing them, the public viewing them as kind of nuts or traitors or something, to heroes, the public's eyes and ears. In 2006, the last time Congress changed hands, and the Democracy Corps did a survey of the voters who had switched parties and switched control of Congress. What are your priorities for the new Congress? And the number one priority was predictable: stop illegal government spending. Number two priority was stronger legal rights for whistleblowers. It was ahead of stopping the war in Iraq. It was ahead of reducing taxes. It was ahead of national health insurance. And that was the start of a landslide of legislation that is the modern free speech rights in the private sector. I think we can do this if we have effective advocacy. For the federal workers, we've got the pioneer statutes, but they're not even as good as for the private sector, the modern private sector laws. Federal workers don't have access to court, have a jury trial. They have to seek justice through bureaucratic administrative law judges who don't have political or judicial independence and know better than to rule against the power structure. They don't have protection against retaliatory investigations or criminal prosecutions. You can be put in jail for something you couldn't be fired for, literally, in the law. They don't have opportunity for short-term temporary relief. These cases can go on for 5 or 6 years, and by the time they do win, if they manage to somehow run the legal gauntlet, it doesn't matter much anymore. It's like the patient who dies before the world-famous heart surgeon makes it to the operating table. We're working to close these loopholes. We've made a lot of progress. We've got a lot of work left to do. And the other way that you can prove to whistleblowers, folks, that you're on their side is to join GAP's campaigns for stronger whistleblower rights. We don't ask you to put in a lot of time. Sign your petitions. The reason we got the Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act passed, after 13 years of fighting for it, in 3 backroom, last-minute secret calls that killed the legislation, we have 400 organizations with 80 million voters demanding that Congress stop playing games and protect the people who are defending the public. And so thanks for giving me a chance to try and recruit you guys too.
And in regard to joining the campaigns, if you also want to be a part of a bigger coalition focusing on whistleblower protections, get in touch with us about joining the Make It Safe Coalition, which already has about 75 organizations, many here today, many not. And we can keep you posted on all of the campaigns. I think we have time for one more question, maybe 2, and then we will after lunch as well, or during lunch, be able to take additional questions.
Hi, Netta with the Open Gov Hub. Thank you so much. This was really rich. I'm wondering if you have any more advice for organizations who have no track record of working with a whistleblower before, but who, based on their own research and work, have good reason to believe of a specific, form of wrongdoing in a, specific bureaucracy, whether corporate or federal. Like, how do you find the whistleblower if you're in that case? Yeah.
Well, we probably both have things to contribute on that one. Two tactics that have been effective for me And I should say that GAP doesn't recruit whistleblowers. It would violate professional ethics norms for us to try and talk people into exposing themselves. So we have people who've already decided to take that risk. But one of the ways that we make ourselves available is through Know Your Rights training programs. An NGO can recruit GAP to have a public session for the labor force in that community. And that's a way to get them thinking about it. Second way is by having briefings and meetings with unions and labor organizations, and they can get the word out to their members as well. That's a couple ideas to get things started.
Yeah, I think, in some ways your question is more like how, those are great ideas. I think, to the extent you have an investigative staff, right, that's often, I think about journalists, obviously, they're not protecting what they're cultivating sources too. And in some of Tom's suggestions around cultivating trust, so like a journalist would cultivate a source, having an employee who's an expert in an organization who, you call as a resource, so it's not necessarily recruiting them to blow the whistle. Ideally, someone doesn't have to take that risk. The idea can be that they can provide information and you can use it in a strategic way without them having to, be on the edge of having to risk reprisal. I mean, the goal isn't, right, to commit professional suicide and be a martyr. I mean, it's by they just want the information out there, to the extent that you can say, they might, again, as I said, they might not know. They might not think of themselves that way, and you don't need to think of them that way either, but to understand that an employee might want to talk and that they're a useful resource, that to the extent that you can then partner with us or another organization that can offer assistance can be useful.
And listening today has sparked another way that we get whistleblowers. It's making ourselves available as a resource to third parties that people might be talking with for how to get away with committing the truth. So if you partner up with a cause lawyer, so you have that capacity, and you'd let the journalist that you're working with know that if they're talking to somebody who's nervous, that we've got access to legal counsel to help guide them, and it's not somebody who's going to tell them to keep their mouth shut. It's going to tell them how to do it safely. Congressional offices, legislative offices, they refer people to us. They say somebody's come in and we don't know what to do with them because we've been out there, and let them know that we're prepared for that contingency. Then we get a lot of referrals that way.
Great. Thank you so much. Again, let's give our speakers another warm round of applause. And before we break for lunch, I'd just like us also all to recognize Christy with Open GovHub. Yes. This would not have been possible without her brilliant logistics support. It's a thankless role. So now let's all enjoy Green Plate Catering. It's a local organic caterer, really good food, and then we can come back in, stand out there, however you'd like to ask additional questions and network. Thanks so much.